Well, the audience might have still been a bit tired for the applause, but we will be powerful on stage.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes, more of that.
There we go.
And what a great panel it already is.
What a great audience.
Absolutely.
Yes, applause.
No prompting needed at all.
We are finishing this panel at we're starting already at 5 p.m. So it's perfectly understandable. We're all waiting for the open bar after this. I don't want to promise an open bar. Anyway, we've got 3 fantastic people. You can see actually the job titles already behind them on the screen, but I want to introduce them to you very briefly. I don't think I need to introduce the country of Germany. I think we all know what Germany is, but we have Benjamin Brake, who is the head of the new Digital and Data Policy Director General from the German Federal Ministry for Digital and Transport. Famously short name for what you do. That's great.
Very German.
As it should be. We've got Keith Strye, the Vice President of Worldwide AI Initiatives for NVIDIA, which is also running on my computer. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And Elsa Pilichowski, who is the Director of the Directorate, that makes sense, for Public Governance at the OECD. Thank you very much for joining us here on stage. Now, we want to talk about the impact of AI on state governance. And I think the most straightforward way in which most people would think about how AI can help is, very broadly speaking, decision making. We're looking at a lot of past data. We're looking at what people want today. Where does it all go? Where can data-based decision making support politicians? So this will be my starting question. We have an AI company quite literally on stage. We've got public sector representatives on stage. What keeps us from introducing AI-augmented policy making right now? Where are we on the journey to that possible reality? Let's start with Benjamin.
From the German point of view, probably what hinders us to introduce AI in political decision makers is the skepticism and the fear. I can only speak for the German situation, but it is always a challenge in Germany to introduce innovation. That was, by the way, the reason why we wanted to learn from Estonia when we've been here with the Minister for Digital earlier this year.
I actually met the minister back then, and I can confirm from having worked at the briefing center that I think the German delegations over the last 5 years or so were the most frequently represented nationality at the briefing center. So there's plenty of political interest, and it's great to see this continue. The skepticism we will talk about later, I think, both from the politician side and also from the public side. Keith, from your angle, is the technology ready for this? Is there still some work to be done on that side? Where do we stand?
So I do have the benefit of traveling across the world and working with lots of governments and seeing what they're doing. And Germany is not alone in its skepticism. I would say the state of AI in government policy making in national parliaments is extremely limited. There are some pilots, there are some examples of some early adopter countries that are testing the potential, but there's no, it's not among the top priorities when it comes to use cases. I think when I was thinking about this session and I was getting prepared for it, it reminded me that I was in Dubai in 2018 and 2018, 2019, now that I think about it. I can't remember, I'm not sure. But it was before COVID. Dubai hosts the World Government Summit every year in February. And they had this little pavilion showing sort of AI use cases at the time. And this was one of the use cases, actually. It was just a TV screen, and it was like showing examples of the potential for AI in policy making and governance. And it was a very interesting little video. They were visioning the future, and it started out with, well, at the very early stages, they might use AI to inform decisions. So it might be about running scenarios or strategies. But at the very far end, it was fully autonomous AI-enabled governance making, where rules and things, which seemed a little bit bold, but, they kind of tried to show you the full spectrum. And that was the first time I started thinking about that. So I think it's been on the table for a number of years, but the technology is definitely ready for a lot of things. I don't know that we're ready to use the technology in that context yet.
Also, what's the OECD's take on this?
Well, I think you started with a very skeptical question, and I will have a more optimistic view of things.
Please.
First, I think that many governments have started to use AI with pilots, slowly but surely. We have about 73% of our countries which report having used AI in their government. So what you call decision making or policy making is a huge word, but they have used it essentially on how to improve service delivery. Well, that's based on user experiences and getting user experiences, etc. I'll come back to that in a second. What is preventing them from going faster is basically that the governance is not ready. I mean, for the public sector to be able to use AI, they need to have data ethics, data management in place, and we know it's there, but it's still a little bit shaky. They need to have AI governance in place, because we know that AI can lead to biased decisions depending on how governed it is. And the third thing is that they also need to make sure that when they use AI, they also encompass the experience and the views of citizens that are not present in the digital world, or that are relatively absent from the digital world. And all these conditions are not there very, very strong yet. They will at some point get there, but at this moment we're not entirely there. So I think governments should start investing in that, and they are starting to. Today, in Canada, they will be publishing the guidance on generative AI, on the use of generative AI in government. But we are getting there. It's very important for governments to have these conditions in place so that when AI is put in place, we don't reach situations where failures would lead to lesser trust in government. Government is not a private company.
I see a skeptical face over there. Do you want to make a quick...
Yeah, it's German view. It's always skeptical.
I expect nothing less.
This is a standard.
I think you're right, but I would not necessarily agree to everything, because there are already principles, guiding principles for the use of AI. The OECD is the best example. You can refer to the OECD principles when actually thinking about deploying AI in public services. In Germany, for example, the data protection authorities, they already a couple of years ago came up with AI principles, not so much on generative AI, but on AI in general. So it needs a bit of a courage, actually, to implement AI solutions. And then, because we're talking about the public sector, in the public sector we have a very sophisticated system of decision making and of levels who is making decisions. So we need to carefully think about where actually to apply AI solutions. Should it be at the start, or should it be in the end when there are just like some last questions open for the political decision making? And I think this is something where we need to invest a bit more thought into.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think also when we talk about these first pilot cases and so on, I really do not want to single out a particular country, but the first one that comes to my mind is the Netherlands with the social welfare scandal, where several where tens of families were made homeless as an effect of being incorrectly flagged as welfare abusers and so on. This brings us to the question of today's status of the discussion on ethical and trustworthy AI. To what extent can we hand over the reins of decision-making and of power to AI? I think another aspect here is that people are not ready to forgive AI yet. And also governments using basic technology. If there is a government hack, some kind of database is being breached, too many politicians would be tempted to say, you know what, scrap the whole thing, digitalization was a bad idea. Mm-hmm. I've seen Australia try 3 times to implement a national electronic identity, mm-hmm. rejected for different reasons every single time. So there's a lot of skepticism when it comes to technology, and perhaps an unrealistic expectation of perfectionism towards technologies. How do we deal with this? Are we right to have this high expectation of AI and technology, or should we temper our expectations?
Well, I do want to react to your opening reference to the Netherlands example. This is so one of the challenges when you talk about AI is that everything gets lumped into it as AI, right? And the concept of automated decision making precedes AI, and does not include any AI. right? The ability to write a rule, some kind of rule, if this, then that, right? And the automation, more recently bucketed under the category of robotic process automation, some kind of robotic or rules-based automation. Now, it may include AI today. There are versions of that is hybrid. But traditionally, it's just a rule, and that rule can be applied. And if there is bias or if there's a problem, it's embedded in the rule, and that rule was written by a human, right? And so I believe in the case of the Netherlands scandal, there was no AI in that case. That was a failure of automated decision-making that was based on a bad rule. And so it was, the problem at the root cause was just,
Human.
Still. Yeah. So it wasn't a failure of AI per se, but automated decision making, is a challenge, for a variety of reasons. And once automated decision making starts to incorporate machine learning, and then you bring all these new challenges, makes it even more complicated, more risky, more fragile. And so I think it is important, though. Not everything that breaks is AI, I guess is my point. And it's interesting when you look at some of the tragic car accidents that have happened in some of the early stage autonomous vehicle testing, right, in the U.S. And there have been some fatal accidents, several. The question then becomes, well, what failed? I mean, was it one of the AI models? Was it a sensor went offline? Was it there's different things. There are lots of points of failure, right? It's not necessarily just the AI that failed. It could have been a mechanical part of the very complex machinery, right, that connects the sensor to the AI, right? And that's.
And I'll just interject very briefly. And even if it was 100% the AI, do we get to expect perfection? Because we don't see headline news every single day there's a car crash with a fatality, right?
1.3 million people a year die in car crashes. And then that's become just sort of a standard accepted statistic, right?
In this context, perhaps, I'm sure you want to add something to this, but the Hiroshima AI process, perhaps you can contextualize this a bit for us.
Yes, actually, the thing is that, because you asked, why are we actually getting rid of AI system, digital system, if there is a leak, if there is a problem, if there is a success cyber attack? I think it's really the way you said, because especially in Europe, we try to anticipate all problems and build it into the technique. We are a bit risk averse. Mm-hmm. We are a bit risk averse on the technique side, but we are also risk averse when it comes to attitude. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge here. So, for example, we are introducing in Germany the electronic patient file. There was a lot of discussion going on before. Is the data secure? How is the data encrypted? What will happen in the case of data breach? And of course, political decision makers were explaining that it is safe. Of course, there's never 100% security. That's a no-brainer. But I think we need to start to tell the people that, of course, there will be a data leak. Of course, there will be successful cyber events. Kallas was talking about resilience. I think this is also part of resilience, that we ourselves are getting a bit more resilient when it comes to the challenges and also to the problems of digitization. Now, because you asked for the G7 process, the Hiroshima process on the G7 level is currently aiming at a code of conduct on generative AI. We're not talking about AI in general, but on generative AI. So what does the German government expect from this? I think we will see something on a very high level, because it is so many different countries. I mean, we are value-based partnership, the G7, but I think we will see some kind of general language on generative AI. The huge question will be, what are we going to do with it? What is the US going to do with it? What is Canada doing with it? What is the Japanese government doing with it? And what are we in Europe doing in our jurisdiction with our ethic? What are we doing with these kind of sentence, general wording?
Do you have a take on this from the OECD? Of course, from the international perspective, is it realistic to expect much of a harmonization effort from these large-scale texts, or is that too much to expect?
Yeah, well, we will have to if we want to support globalization. That there is no other way. But I would like to rebound a little bit on what was said earlier. AI is not only an opportunity for how we do policy making or how we do service delivery. It's actually a must. It's inconceivable that we can continue to deliver services without using AI in the future, and how we, for example, deliver public services is crucial for trust. If the rest of society is moving with AI, citizens will have a requirement that the public sector uses AI to improve services where AI can be very useful. So the question is not whether the public sector should go there, it will have to not to lose trust. So that's a very important part. The other important part, though, is that each failure of this technology and the way governments use this technology, we will have to pay a high price for its own trust. So it's both we have to use it, but we also have to put all the safeguards around it. And that's the big challenge for governments today. So that's to rebound a little bit. It is a must, and I think we all have to acknowledge that today. Otherwise, we will lose the trust. What is clear, however, is that the trust that we can gain with improved services is limited. But if we don't improve it, the loss of trust will be big. So that's the big difficulty, is that the risks are high. There's no other way than to go there. And if we don't go that, we lose the trust. So it's a bit of it's a complex line to follow for governments. In terms of international governance, which is very important, we live in a global world where transactions are cross-border, where we have migration, where we look at supply chains that all over the countries, where AI can help with identifying weaknesses in supply chains, etc. We need AI systems to talk to each other, and for that we need to have them, recognized at least.
I might have to disagree on a small part regarding trust aversion versus reward. I feel like there are some countries in the world where if you don't change anything, even if it's awful, they'll be happier with it than if you try something new and it goes wrong. Germany probably being one of them. And I, just speaking from experience as a German myself, actually you mentioned a very interesting point with the patient record that is supposed to be implemented in 2025, if I remember correctly. And if I understand correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong. There was the understanding that it should not be made compulsory, that people can still choose. This brings me to an interesting point about the use of AI in the public sector. Should we as citizens, as residents, have the right to say, I want my decision or decisions about me to be made by a human rather than a computer? Is this something that we can expect from government at some point?
Honestly, for example, when we say we should introduce AI in the public services, we're doing this for many reasons. But first of all, because we can't afford not to do so, because there will be a lack of employees there. So we need to actually use AI, use automating decision-making with standard protocols, with standard questions, so that those people working in public administration could concentrate on complex cases. Yes. So from this point of view, no, you don't have the right to be handled by a human. But you have the right to actually not agree with a decision.
To appeal to.
It. That must be clear.
Or the right to transparency, to know that there's a decision at all.
That's a given. That's a given.
But I do want to come back. I kind of want to defend your point for a second. The idea that we must do it, I think you have to parse that out a little bit more. So, because government isn't one thing. Government is a spectrum of capabilities and services, and there's both civilian and defense. And I think when you do look at the operations of government, sure, some services you can probably leave as is for a while. And governments don't compete like companies compete. Companies in a market, they to survive, to thrive, to recruit, and to serve customers, to be profitable. I mean, there's a point at which if they're not using the most advanced technologies, then they just fade away. And so there's no question. Governments don't fade away. They do get unelected sometimes, right? But countries don't have to compete on the same level. However, that's not necessarily true if you move out of some of the pure civilian context and you look to some of the more intense areas of defense. Actually, the security of nations will depend on the must use these technologies. And countries that are not investing in building these capabilities will find themselves more vulnerable. And countries that are unable to invest, so it's not a choice, but you're a smaller country, an emerging market, you will be more vulnerable, right, to certain things. So I think there are parts of the government, the mission of government, where in fact it is increasingly necessary, and that portfolio is going to grow over time.
When it comes to worldwide AI initiatives for which you are the vice president, can you give some examples of what kind of stuff NVIDIA does? Is it mostly private, mostly public sector?
Yeah, sure.
What's happening in that space?
So most people, most people don't know NVIDIA unless you've been to our headquarters and you've had a chance to spend a little time with us, walk through our executive briefing center, go through our demo center and really hear the whole story, which I'm not going to occupy because there's only 19 minutes left. But what I will tell you is, NVIDIA is a very interesting and unique company that was founded over 30 years ago on the purpose of creating a specialized computer that would accelerate workloads, and the first workload was games, right? And that is the passion of the founders. There's this group of engineers who just invented this computer 30 years ago, and it was focused just on games for a while, but that same computer is now used to accelerate many other workloads, scientific computing and all animation and Hollywood special effects and autonomous vehicles and obviously deep learning models and so forth. All of those things are workloads that run on this specialized computer called an accelerated computer. At this point in time, after 3 decades, that platform is driving the majority of deep learning in the world. But that was not an accident. That was the result of 10 years of investment, right, in the hardware and software to do that. And you look across the economy and in the retail sector and pharmaceuticals and in auto and in government, NVIDIA has a very strong presence in some more than others. But in the public sector, I would say, look, if you look at our overall business, public sector is not the biggest part of our business. The biggest part of our business would be the cloud sector and the public cloud. The second, would be gaming, as a sector, and one of the bigger individual verticals is the auto sector, for example. But government is much smaller than that. However, it is growing rapidly as governments wake up, to the need to do this, right? And so I've only been in NVIDIA 4 years. And I'm responsible for our global public sector and all of our strategic engagements with governments. And 4 years ago, that was a little bit of a harder conversation to have. Like, why are we meeting with a gaming company? And what do you have to do with us? And now that conversation is very different. And the answer is we're not the solution to all your problems, but we do provide this specialized infrastructure that is the only way that you will have the domestic ability to produce AI. And so if you don't have this infrastructure, then you don't get to be a world-class AI leader. Just like if you don't have roads and bridges and airports, you don't get to transport things. I mean, it's just, this is the infrastructure you need. So it's a different conversation today than it was 4 years ago, and we're very privileged to have that conversation. And obviously, countries are all in different states of readiness, and they all have different visions and strategies and whatever. But the common thread through them all is that they see AI as an engine for economic growth. Some countries see it as a huge opportunity to reinvent their economy and leapfrog. To punch above their weight, as it were, smaller countries. In other countries, the number one priority is national security, and they see it as mostly about protecting what they have. So every country has a different angle towards it. But if you don't have the infrastructure, then you don't get to do it. So that's the primary conversation that we have.
Just to follow on this one, it is crucially important to mention that because we say we don't have a decision, we don't have a choice actually whether or not to implement AI in public services. What we have right now is still a window of opportunity to get engaged in a discussion with those actually providing it, trying to actually craft it in a way that it fits our needs. But this window of opportunity is closing with the demographic change and the lack of qualified workforce. And we might have a situation, and we should crucially avoid this situation, where we are in a position where we only can buy what is on the market, and that might not fit our needs. So it is crucially important to act now.
So leaving the question of trust and so on to the side, what is the wish list that public and private sector have for each other right now? I'm just taking you guys as an example, to make sure that we don't miss that window of opportunity. Here we are on stage. Just a wish list.
Yeah.
What's missing?
I don't know what's missing, but I actually, look, I think I did a little homework before we got on stage. I was trying to just give myself some metaphors or analogies that I could mention while up here. and I was, you look at cars as an example, and I only know this because I looked this up, so I'm not some freak that knows all these factoids. But the first truly available commercially ready car was given to the world around 1886. That's kind of when everyone agrees that's kind of when it happened. It took 100 years before seatbelts were required. 100 years. So seatbelts were actually required by law in the United States in the 1960s. So by 1970, all cars had seatbelts, but you were not required to use them. It took another 15 years, and I remember this because the first state in the United States to mandate seatbelts was New York State. I grew up in New York State. It was 1984. I was 13, and I remember my mom saying, "You have to wear your seatbelt."
Oh, Mom, seatbelt.
We're just used to running around the car. What's going on? Because it became law in 1984 for the first time, And so from 1886 to 1984, right? It wasn't a law in India until 1998. So we think of that span 100 years, right? And you think about what's happening now, right? AI, the modern era of AI really started. I say modern because it's been around a long time, but the modern era really started around 2012. So we're about 10 years into this modern era. And really, I would say that AI did not become a mainstream topic until the World Economic Forum published their white paper on the fourth industrial revolution. Back in 2017, was it, around there? And that really catapulted the awareness level pretty significantly. And then things have just accelerated since then. Once Canada started with the first national AI plan, and then it just took off from there. So we're really 5 years, very short period of time. If you go back to 2017, not a single country in the world had an AI strategy, right? Prime ministers and presidents weren't talking about this. It was not a topic, right? And now so I think within 5 years, we've made more progress in terms of the collaboration and policymaking and towards regulation than we did in 100 years of cars. So to me, that's not bad. I'm not saying we've...
It's already encouraging, yes.
It's already, so I'm encouraged by that pace, but I know we haven't finished.
And when you mention, I'll let both of you speak, of course, when you mention the sort of awareness of the general public of seatbelt laws and so on, if I would have told my parents in 2017 about AI, they would have said that, oh, that's really cool computer stuff.
Yeah.
But when I showed them all of a sudden ChatGPT, for the first time it was tangible for the population. They were like, it's not, of course, it's not the only example, but finally we understand what this thing is doing. I'm just telling it something and it just does it. It does it based on stuff that other humans have done before. It mixes it up, it rejigs it, but effectively, this is how it works. Perhaps Elsa, you go first.
Yeah, no, I just want to rebound on the comparison with cars, because in fact, the adoption of cars was took much longer to adopt cars than it is to adopt digital technologies.
It did.
So first of all, it's like the timeline has reduced tremendously. Yes. So there's the time doesn't appear the same. The second thing is that because of that, the dangers and the risks are much faster to develop.
That's right.
So we need to find the governance much faster. And the risks are actually wider and encompass the whole of society at once, almost at a very, very large scale, whereas the risk that you had with cars was at the individual level.
Yes.
So
as long as you stay off the road, you're fine.
Yes, exactly. So there's a major difference.
Absolutely.
And we are behind. And the other thing that I want to say is that there are many people that see the risks, and sometimes I also have myself a little bit of the sentiment that we're also like before the great financial crisis, when we knew we needed to regulate the financial sector because of financial sector innovations, and the price of not regulating at that time and not looking at it was very, very high. Yeah. So it's also that we have to look at very closely. It's these risks that we're all looking at with like the incapacity to look at it together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
Ben is bursting and bubbling on the inside.
I won't add a new layer on the discussion around like seat belts and
Airbags?
Airbags.
I could come on with airbags, yes.
Talk to a German about cars.
No. But Florian, earlier on, you asked what stops us from introducing AI, for example, to public services. And you also asked, what is a wish list? And we were like reluctant to answer to this. So this is a sign, by the way, that we might have more questions, especially when it comes to generative AI. And currently, we're talking about regulating generative AI. So from our point of view, we need to find the right regulatory framework to address these questions. And that framework has to be more flexible than a hard regulation, because we're talking about quickly evolving technology, and we are at the same time talking about a bunch of questions to which we might not have the answer. So we should carefully ask ourselves whether or not hard regulation, as we're currently debating it on the EU level with the AI Act, is also the right framework to regulate generative AI.
Only time will tell. I would like to give the chance to the members of the audience to ask questions as well. I believe that we have one or two colleagues of ours who can come from the stage and bring microphones to those people in the audience that have questions. But perhaps before we go there, one last quick question that I want to ask you so that we have some more time for questions from the audience is, we're going to have dinner tonight, we're going to meet again in different forums and so on. What is the main question that you would like the general public, not just the specialists, not just the lawyers, the general public to discuss in terms of AI development with regards to the public sector? What do we need to discuss? Clearly, we're not at a stage where this is dinner table conversation. I think ChatGPT was the first sort of tiny push where all of a sudden this was like front page news kind of stuff. But apart from that, it hasn't really, burst onto the scene a lot. So what do we as a society need to agree upon to go a bit further?
Well,
to strengthen our resilience, I think that is crucially important, that we embrace new technology, that we look at the opportunities. We didn't mention many of the opportunities. We were discussing more about the challenges and the problems.
I think the opportunities are clear.
Very often the people say that the opportunities are clear, but I doubt it. If you really ask them, then it's difficult actually to explain what are the opportunities. We need to talk more about the opportunities, and we need to become a bit more resilient with our attitude towards technology innovation in order actually to really cope with the problems that will arise with this new technology.
So there is one of the answers, to discuss this as a force for good, to of course be mindful of its effects, but to look at it with a positive, open mind. Your thoughts?
Well, I would say I often hear that we need to understand technologies to understand, the digital activities or the AI activities. I think there's a question about bringing those issues to the public in a very simple manner, so that democracy can actually play its role, which is to decide. No technology needs to be understood. I mean, I have no idea how a car functions, to continue the metaphor.
Still drive it.
I'm really pathetic on
You can follow
cars.
the rules and put on your seatbelt.
But I actually know, as a people, whether I want seatbelts or not.
Yeah.
I don't need to know how the engine functions to know that. And there's something about that, about digital technologies and AI, in terms of the consequences on people's lives are pretty simple to discuss. And we should be able to bring more people on board and to build the democratic decision-making around that, on bringing the consequences that are very easy to understand, and starting from them, we start building the resilience. Yeah. But if we start always by saying, like I hear all the time, we need to understand technologies to be able to look at them, what we need to understand as society and as policymakers is the positive consequences and the risks. And these are quite simple. They are not difficult, they are not complex. And I think that's, for me, a huge challenge looming ahead. bring that to the people.
In a couple of seconds, your thoughts, Keith.
Yeah, so technology is morally neutral, right? It's agnostic. It is the humans that design and apply them that cause the problems. And I think that any more than you know what happens under the hood of a car, most people will never understand what's going on inside of a deep learning model, but you can still learn how to apply them ethically. You can still understand their flaws. You can still understand how to use them responsibly. I actually spend a fair amount of time recently with secondary school teachers and principals in my home county. We have about 500,000 students in Orange County, where I live, and they're trying to figure out the school districts are trying to figure out, what to do, and I say, look, it's very simple. You need to teach this generation of students. You need to educate a generation of legislators and parliamentarians that you may not understand the technology, but you can understand what doesn't work. You can understand its flaws. You can understand what's the responsible use of this technology, and that's a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. We have about 4 minutes on the clock, so we have time for one question from the audience. If there's one thing I've learned while moderating over the last couple of years, number one, please mention your name and position. And number two, please make sure that your question has a question mark at the end. Anyone from the audience who has a question? Here, the gentleman in the front.
Yeah. Florian Breger, IBM. What does German government actually do to create a penalty-free environment that governments can experiment with generative AI?
I should, in terms of transparency, mention that as a former colleague of mine.
Yes, I just had to smile when I saw him take the microphone, yes.
So he's a plant.
So there is a business plan behind it. No, I think it requires more courage also for governments. As I said, also we talk about ourselves as individuals becoming more resilient. I think also governments need to become more resilient in testing, in sandboxing these new technologies. We are actually starting in the Ministry for Digital and Transport with some initiatives around AI. We have a funding program also for companies that would like to invest in AI and don't know if it will pay off. So there is already some small initiatives here, but we need to, of course, scale it.
I want to pay reference to the previous panel moderated by Annette Nummer, which was about enabling innovation and so on through legal sandboxing. So just to create the environment where mistakes are allowed to happen, where they're not necessarily encouraged, but you need to sort of find your boundaries and see where the path leads.
But even before you get to sandboxes, which are great, even before that, two really shockingly contrasting reactions to ChatGPT in the US was the city of New York versus the city of Boston. So the city of New York school district banned it, basically put the foot down. This is terrible, keep this out, we can't do anything. The city of New York itself did nothing. But the city of Boston said, well, let's create a playbook. Let's actually help people. Let's tell the government employees what they need to be thinking about, what questions to ask, what risks they need to worry about. It's like a completely different reaction, right? And I think, again, there's different ways to start. Sandbox being sort of a more sophisticated next step, perhaps.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, the ladies and gentlemen on stage as well, thank you very much for being here at Talent Digital Summit. Thank you for joining us for this final panel discussion of the day. I feel like overall it was a very enlightening day. There were plenty of high-level guests here. It was lovely to discuss with you both on stage and during the coffee and lunch breaks. Thank you very much for joining us both physically and online through the internet. And we look forward to welcoming you back to the next Talent Digital Summit, hopefully next year. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to the guests. And most importantly, thank you to all of you in the audience. Have a wonderful evening.